Hi, everyone. It's 3 o'clock now, Eastern time, so I guess we'll get started. So I'll introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Erika. I'm a senior at the University of Oregon, and I'm also a Johns Hopkins Neuroscience Scholar and a peer mentor for the Johns Hopkins Internship in Brain Sciences program. I'm joined today by Ms. Heather Thomas and Dr. Amanda Brown, and I'll let them introduce themselves really quick.
Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Brown. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a application workshop that has been driven by Ms. Erika Mo and with, thank you, yeah, clap, with assistance, close assistance from Heather Thomas. And I'm just really delighted to be here and look forward to engaging with all of you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It looks like we have a small group, but that's fine. We're going to record this session and have it posted to our websites for future. I'm the program manager for the undergraduate programs and the high school program. We're here today just to give you some tips and some insight into the application process. And this can be applied to any applications that you're going to, any programs that you're going to apply for in the future. Please feel free to ask questions. Erika is going to lead the discussion today, but if anytime you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat or just use the raise hand function with the icons here, and we would be happy to answer questions today. So again, thank you for joining us.
Okay, so again, why are we here today? Well, just last year, I was in your same position. I knew I wanted to get some summer work, but I wasn't really sure how to land a position. And it took me a few tries, but I learned a lot of things along the way that I wish I had known prior to starting all this application process stuff. And it never really occurred to me that how I was being evaluated during these applications. And so the goals for this workshop is to just help you understand the application process in more depth, as well as how sometimes it's being evaluated. And yes, so now let's move on to the basic outline for our talk today. So we're going to basically go through each part of the application. And to start off, we're going to do some talking about the detailed personal information section. This is usually at the beginning of the application, and it's usually glossed over. I definitely did it sometimes, but it's actually super important. So you want to include your name, basic information like your phone number, an email address that you actually check regularly, and that has room in your inbox to receive new emails, because that's pretty important. We also need to address the NIH required information, part of the detailed part of the personal information. And I don't know too much about it, so we're going to have Ms. Thomas talk more about the diversity notice while I pull that up on my computer. At least I'll try.
Thanks, Erika. Okay, so the reason why this is important is because our programs are funded by the National Institutes of Health. And so as part of the requirements and part of our mission really for these programs are to improve the diversity of the scientific workforce. So to do that, the NIH has provided a notice. This is what you see right here, and it lists the criteria. So the diversity, underrepresented minorities, you must hear that a lot, URM. And so part of that, it just breaks down which groups those are. And the first one is racial and ethnic groups. And those are Blacks or African Americans, Hispanics or Latinos, American Indians or Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders. So that's one question you're going to see a lot if you're applying to NIH funded programs, because it is a requirement. Another category that they're looking at now are those with disabilities. And as you may or may not know, one of our programs specifically focuses on those who are deaf and hard of hearing. And so we really try to target students who have these physical or mental impairments. And then finally, the last criteria that we're looking at now are those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And the NIH listed several criteria where you have to meet 2 or more of those criteria to be listed in a disadvantaged group. And that's usually those that come from, that were homeless at one point, or their family was, if you were in a foster care system, ever received a reduced lunch program, if both of your parents didn't get a bachelor's degree, if you grew up in a rural area, and they have a whole listing of zip codes, and you just plug in the zip code and it'll tell you if it was a rural or a disadvantaged area. So the NIH just really runs to support all of these type of students. So that's the reason why we ask you that in the application. And so now you know why. So thank you. Go ahead, Erika.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. And one more thing to note when you're just doing this general overview of the application is that you need to include as much detail as possible, and you need to include all of the required information, because if you don't, most programs just won't even consider your application. Okay, so the first part of the application that we're going to talk about today is the resume. A lot of students have questions about the resume, like, for example, what should my resume look like? What should I include in my resume? What's the difference between a CV and a resume? I didn't even know what a CV was just up until like a couple years ago. So anyway, let's address that first question. What should my resume look like? And you can do this, you can fix this problem by just using a standard outline or a format that you would get from an online resume builder. A second question, what should I include in my resume? You should also, again, include your basic personal information like your name, phone number, an email address that you regularly check and have available space in your inbox. And depending on the program, you may need to include your high school name and dates of attendance. It really depends on the program. But if they don't specify, go ahead and include your high school and your university names and dates of attendance. You also want to include your GPA from your high school and your university, as well as any awards that you may have received. But beyond that, it kind of depends on what your activities are in high school if you want to include them. So for example, if you were applying to a neuroscience research position and you're in college now, and you were in neuroscience club in high school, that's something you definitely want to include in your resume. However, if you were in volleyball, you participated in volleyball when you were in high school and you're applying for a neuroscience research position, that may not be the best place to put that information, but you can definitely include it in your interests and hobbies section of your resume. Lastly, at the end of your resume, you should include a references section that you can just have this statement, references are available upon request. And lastly, what's the difference between a CV and a resume? Again, I didn't know what a CV was until 2 years ago, and I believe it's pronounced curriculum vitae, and it's basically just a more academic version of your resume. So your resume, you kind of want to include all of your past work experience, but your CV, that's not always the case. So for example, if you were a camp counselor a couple years ago, that may not be something you would include on your CV. But if you were, for example, had past research experience, you definitely want to include that in your CV. And you want to go into more detail on your CV as well. So you want to talk about your involvement and your role in that position you played with the research. And you also, for the resume and CV, want to include everything in chronological order. But for the most part, for these summer programs, resumes are usually okay. Moving on to transcripts, most programs will ask you for an unofficial transcript. Sometimes official transcripts are required. And for the Johns Hopkins program, you also need your high school transcript. And just one thing to note here is you want to give yourself at least a week to get your transcripts in order. It took me about a week to get my high school transcript. I had to talk to a few people, go through a few different hoops. So yeah, you don't want to wait till the last minute to get those in line. Okay. And then another source of questions is the letters of recommendation. And we've put this into the do's and don'ts. The first thing you need to do when thinking about letters of recommendation is first you need to find out who you want to write your letter. And a good way to start thinking about this is, can these people write you a good letter of recommendation? And this isn't an easy question to answer. I never really thought about it until, again, a couple years ago. I have a couple mentors in medical school, and they actually told me they would approach potential reference writers or letter writers and ask them, hey, can you write me a good, strong letter of recommendation? And it is pretty awkward, but it makes sense, because if you have a letter from a really famous, prominent faculty member, but they don't know you that well, that letter may not be as strong as a letter you get from someone who knows you a lot better, who can attest to your abilities and your personality. But again, I think that is kind of an awkward question to ask. So I was hoping we could talk more about that as a group. If Ms. Heather Thomas or Dr. Amanda Brown have anything to add, this would be a great opportunity.
Erika, I think you were right on point about making sure that it's someone that you've worked with at some level, at some depth. Even if it's one of your professors in a class, but you've engaged that professor, after the class many times over the course of the semester, you did well in the class. That would be a much better letter than saying, oh, this person is, well known, but yet they know little about you. So I definitely agree with that. And it is, I agree, to ask. First, it's, I think, difficult even for students to ask for a letter, but then more so to say, oh, can you write me a strong letter? But you just have to say that. Yes, would you be able, I'm really interested in this program for these reasons. And I think you know me at some level. Would you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation? I'd really appreciate it. Heather, oh, Heather agrees. How about Zandy? What is your experience?
I think it's just, well, I don't know what Erica's going to go over, but I think it's also important to provide all the information that the recommender needs before you ask them. Like, make sure you know exactly what program you're applying to, how soon in advance, ask them pretty soon in advance, and make sure you send over a resume or CV or whatever to give them some context on the person you are outside of school.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And that was actually some of my next bullet points. So good thinking, Zandy. But going off of that first one, make sure ideally that you know your letter writers, and ideally that they know you too. And like Zandy said, you want to make sure that you give them a lot of time to write this letter. Usually you want to give them at least 1 month to write the letter. And you want to include or give them all the information that they could possibly need to write you a strong letter of recommendation. So this includes the name of the program, when the application is due, information about the program, so maybe a link to it, maybe a short summary in your own words, why you want to go to that program, where to actually send this letter of recommendation. Don't just give them the general website link. A lot of times programs will have you email a certain email address or submit the letter to a specific form. So you want to be really specific on where you want them to submit this letter. And again, you can give some more information about yourself outside of school, and also give them your resume. And in the weeks going up to your application deadline, you can give them friendly reminders maybe every week or two. One way that I like to do this is I just like to email them saying, hey, just wanted to check in about this application due on so-and-so date. Just wondering if you needed any additional information for me or from me. And lastly, make sure you thank them for their help and maintain communication with them after your application has been submitted. Now let's move on to some of the don'ts. I will move all your faces out of the way. Okay, the first don't is don't wait until the last minute to ask this person. And don't list their name on your references list without their consent or their knowledge. And again, you want to give them a lot of detailed information about yourself so they can write you a strong letter of recommendation. This is an important point, not just for letters of recommendation, but for applications in general. Don't take it personally if you get a rejection letter once in a while. It's nothing personal. And for people who say no to letters of recommendation, again, 9 times out of 10, it's more of a timing issue than a personal problem with yourself. These people have really busy schedules. Lastly, do not make this hard for your letter writer. They're doing you a favor, so you want to make sure that all the information that you're giving them is organized and concise. One way that I like to do this, I kind of started doing this towards the end of my applications, is I would actually make an Excel file of all the information you see here on the left. And I think that helped my letter writers keep everything organized. And yeah, I was applying to a lot of programs, so I think that helped. Here are some more questions that students often have about letters of recommendation. So a lot of programs will give you the option to submit, for example, 3 to 5 letters of recommendation. And students may have 5 people who could write them a letter. Should they include all 5 letters of recommendation? And the answer is, usually yes, more is better. If you have 5 really strong letters of recommendation, go ahead, submit them all. That's great. However, if you maybe have 3 really strong ones and maybe 2 lukewarm ones, that might require some more thinking, because you should definitely include all the 3 strong ones for sure. But keep in mind that these programs are receiving huge amounts of work to do, lots of letters to read. And if you're giving them 2 more letters to read that may not strengthen your application, it may not be in your best interest. So just really try to evaluate, will this help strengthen my application? The next common question is, do all my recommenders have to be science faculty? And the answer is no, but they are preferred because this is a science research position. However, people outside of science can also give great testaments to your abilities and your personality. The next question we have is, how well do I have to know someone before I can ask them for a letter? And like Dr. Brown said, if you interact during office hours, you interact in class, that's probably good enough to feel comfortable asking them for a letter of recommendation. The next question is, how do I ask for a letter of recommendation? And my go-to is the good old-fashioned email, but you can also do it in person during office hours or before or after class, or you can even give them a handwritten letter about the details about yourself and the program that you hope to apply to. The last question we have here is pretty common for freshmen, and now that we're largely remote, you're in large online classes, you're not always making the same connections that you used to with those in-person classes. So what if I haven't made many connections yet in college? You can still ask a person for a letter of recommendation, even if you don't know them that well. You can just give them a 1-page summary of your interest in the program, maybe some background about yourself. And I was wondering if Heather could give maybe some more feedback on the 1-page summary of interest.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting because I was thinking of the students, like you said, who haven't made many connections, or even those that are a little shy, you know what I mean? And you don't know how to approach a professor or something like that. So I'm thinking just come up with a 1-pager. You have your name on there, maybe even a picture of you so they remember you. And just your interest, your general interests, and nothing more than a page, what you're interested in. And perhaps they align with that professor, you know what I mean? And they might spark their interest, and they would get, they would get to know you and know that you're interested to build maybe a mentoring relationship, and they'll notice you more if they know your name. So that's one way. I know I'm personally shy, so that's just an idea I would have is, here you go. If you're interested, please, I'd be happy to meet with you more via email or on the phone or via Zoom. So I think that's just a way to kind of get your foot in the door. Go ahead, Zandy.
I think as far as just making connections, especially in a virtual environment, something that's been really helpful for me is taking smaller seminar classes, which I know might not really be possible for a freshman or sophomore, but engaging in office hours and taking small seminar classes and just emailing just out of respect and what you're interested in. It doesn't have to be, oh, I have a question, but just be interested in something that the professor is studying. That's one way to show interest and maybe build a connection with that faculty member.
That's a great idea.
Great, thank you for the extra comments there. And also, just to help diffuse some tension, most people will say yes if you ask them for a letter of recommendation, so don't get too worried about it. Okay, now we are going to have Dr. Brown talk about what makes a strong letter of recommendation.
Oh, thank you, Zandy, Heather, and Zandy for those really excellent comments. In listening, I hadn't appreciated enough, right? This virtual environment that we've been in, because there was a little delay in us knowing what kind of programming, particularly for the high school students, we were going to have this summer. And so, I think, thank you for doing this workshop, because, we just ask, right? Letters of recommendation, like it's normal. But, right, yeah, you've been virtual. And so if teachers haven't discussed this, if no one has talked about this, I know it certainly was an oversight. So I really appreciate this. So a strong letter of recommendation is going to talk about the strengths of the individual. What made them stand out in the class. Because again, you're going to ask a letter of recommendation from those teachers that know you, that you've interacted with. So they're going to be able to give some insight beyond the fact that you got a really good score, or that you're, even if they talk about your lab report, the detail with which you worked on your lab report. How did you interact with your peers? Will also be critical. They can address why they think this program is suited to you. That would also catch our eye. And again, about some of those leadership characteristics. Not that you have to be a leader, but if you have them, great. And so I think those are some of the key points. Of course, the academics and how you did in the course. It could be also a story of maybe initially you didn't do so well, and then you improved, and you had a conversation with your teacher. Maybe there was something going on in your life that affected that performance, and something that you then shared. So it's all individual. There is no one right answer. There's no right answer to this. It's really giving a full picture of the individual, their strengths. Sometimes people even say this is something that they could work on, but it comes from a positive point of view. Heather, you have something you want to add to that?
I agree with everything you've mentioned. You know, it makes me think back to when I was a residency program coordinator, and I read a lot of letters of recommendation, and I would always like quotes, you know, especially quotes that professors remembered, or this was more like patient care, you know what I mean? They had really great bedside manner, and or, you know, the way that they answered questions during our rounding, you know, that sort of thing. So they remembered the person, you know, I mean, they could pinpoint key details and special circumstances that made them stand out. It wasn't just like, I highly recommend them, contact me if you need to. It wasn't something like that. It was, you could tell they actually put forth the effort, or they, you know, you could really tell they enjoyed writing this letter for this person. You know, they would say, you know, I've had all these students through all my years, and I would definitely place them on the top 5. You can really tell that they want this person to exceed, you know what I mean, succeed. So you can really feel a strong letter just by reading it, and you can tell a lukewarm. I wish I could give you key pointers on that, but that's been my experience. If the person, you can tell if someone knows you, if the letter writer knows the person.
Yes, I agree. Go ahead, Sandy.
I had a question for Dr. Brown and Heather. I was reading something that Talak sent earlier today. I think, well, when I applied for this program, I wasn't really comfortable talking about hearing loss and my disability, but I think some of my letter recommenders mentioned it without really asking me. Would that still be seen as a liability? I mean, I hope it wouldn't, but, you know, I think, you know, our backgrounds give us a lot of information, but, you know, disclosing disability, disclosing those kind of background information can still be a hindrance. So do you have any tips for, I guess, students who, you know, want to disclose that and tell their recommenders about it? How do they go about that, and to make it more of a positive spin?
Well, I think that one pager and that statement, so actually having a conversation with the prospective letter writer, and if it's something that, you know, there's certain things that you don't want disclosed or want them to disclose, that is really important and critical for them to know. And so, yes, I think having that conversation up front is really important. And thank you, Sandy, because I hadn't considered that. Yeah, it does come up, right? I mean, you know, often, you know, we want someone, right, to get the position, to get the opportunity because of their strengths, of their performance. Oh, it so happens that they're a woman, they're a man, or they're X, Y, Z. So again, it's on the letter writer to you know, present that total picture. Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that?
I will just say it's kind of a double-edged sword, because then again, for NIH funded grants, you know, they're targeting certain populations. So you kind of want, you know, your letter writer in those. So it really matters which program you're targeting and how much information you're willing to divulge.
Yes.
You know, so right towards the application and what the key, if they don't need to know and it's not going to help you any per se, then it's not needed, right? But if this grant is covering specifically, you know, students who are URM or whoever else, it would benefit them.
And so that will be a different part, like if it's a whole, you know, application. So there will be other pieces in the application where there's a box or whatever. So they will already know that you're eligible, because that applies to the eligibility. So it doesn't necessarily have to be addressed by the applicant. And if they do, more than likely they're going to address it from a a strengths point of view. It's not a deficit, it's a strengths.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Brown, Ms. Thomas, and Zandy. That was really helpful. Okay, the next common source of stress with these applications are the essays. And yeah, I struggle with essays as well. I think most people do. But it's important to keep in mind that when you're writing these essays are an opportunity for the program to get to know you outside of your resume and outside of your stats. And it's an opportunity to show how you would fit in with the goals of that particular program. A lot of people are also worried when doing these science applications, science research applications, because they haven't gotten any research experience yet. That's why they're applying to this program, to get the research experience. But that's okay. You can write about your life experiences too, because those are also really important and they can make great essays as well. Lastly, most programs will have you write about a few different essays, and those essays usually have sometimes short word limits depending on the application. And these last 3 bullet points are the essay prompts for the Johns Hopkins Neuroscience Scholars Program. Okay, great. So you submitted your application on time, you're checking your email regularly, you know that there's room in your inbox to receive new emails, and you get an email or a phone call asking for an interview. Great. So here are some interview tips. And actually, Zandy, I saw your hand. So did you have a question or something you wanted to add?
Question about the personal statement. When I initially applied to this program, I wrote a very creative, like descriptive, like all the imagery kind of statement. Would you, maybe just more of a question for Heather and Dr. Brown, but would you prefer like a more straightforward essay, just like this is where I am and these are my interests and that's it? Or do you want to like get that human kind of aspect of it when you're reading these kind of essays?
Well, I think, we had a little discussion beforehand, but this is the tough piece. But really what it comes down to is be who you are. Tell us your story, what it is that you want us to know. We talked about that, we all come with different strengths and weaknesses with writing, for example. And writing essays, and maybe some people will use a rubric, so it doesn't maybe won't come across as well as somebody who enjoys telling a story and who knows how to craft it. So you want to get feedback, share it, even with just your parents, your friends, have them read it. What sense did they get after they read it? What was the sense that they got from it? Did they say, yes, this really represents you, Zandy? Or no, there's something missing, Zandy. You didn't talk about, that time when XYZ happened and you stood up to that person and you stood up to the group and we succeeded in advocating for more resources. Yeah, so I don't think it's something, that you can gain. And the onus is on the program and those who are reviewing the applications to take a holistic response. Look at the total picture. And these questions also provide a prompt so that, if you do advance to the next stage, these questions will provide a basis for further conversation.
And I'd also like to add, Zandy, you are very creative. So yes, absolutely. Use your word imagery and everything else. And actually you've given us a nice class on that before. So for the benefit of our audience today, I would say definitely, if you're a creative writer, just use that to your benefit. You know what I mean? Tell us a story in that 250 word limit. And I think that'll grab the reader's attention. Now, if you're not such a great writer, the details are important, So go deeper, you know, tell us what it meant. Tell us what you learned, you know, tell us what you're going to do differently, or how are you going to improve this system or yourself now because of that situation. And just like that life experience, you know, maybe you were sitting in the hospital for weeks on end with your grandfather, and all of a sudden you just had this epiphany, like, I want to be a medical doctor in this, you know what I mean? You use that experience, and I just love watching the nurses do this and talking to the doctors about this. And, you know, you're going deeper, and you're really saying why you want to do this, you know.
Going off of that, I have heard from some of my mentors that some of their tips or strategies when writing these essays were to tell a story instead of just say, oh, I'm honest. Tell them a story, how you demonstrated that you were honest, or that instead of saying you're hardworking, show how you were hardworking through an example. That's something I'm trying to do myself right now as I write up some essays for some programs. Okay, moving back to the interview tips. Your visual appearance and your attitude are important when you're going to this interview. You want to show that you're interested and you're really just want to involve yourself in this program. And a lot of people get nervous when they go into these interviews. They want to give a short, quick answer to all the questions that come up during the interview, but it's okay if you ask for a couple seconds to think about your response. And this can actually show that you're trying to give them a thoughtful answer. Lastly, it's a good idea to prepare for your interview. And one way you can do this is by researching the program that you're applying for. So going through their website pages, looking at their goals, any events that they hold. And if you can come up with some detailed questions about the program, that looks great, and you can ask them during the interview, because they usually have a period set aside at the end of the interview for any questions that you may have. And this again shows that you're interested and invested in the program. And here are some interview categories, just to think in mind, or just to keep in mind when you're doing your interview. They're looking at your professionalism, your coachability potential, how you're responding to their questions, your general attitude, and how well prepared you are for your interview. And now,
Erika, could I just interrupt here? We have Shravya. She had a question, and she asked, what types of programs or extracurriculars should we look into when applying to medical related fields? And I'm sorry, I have some eye sensitivity, so I have to put on my shades. Okay. So what types of programs or extracurriculars should we look into when applying to medical related fields?
well, some things that I'm doing, I don't know if they're the best ones, but I'm volunteering at the local hospital. I'm volunteering at a dental office right now. I email a lot of I do a lot of cold emails to different offices in the area asking if I can volunteer or shadow. Shadowing is also important when applying to medical school. It shows that you actually have done research about the potential career that you're interested in. They don't want to invest all this money in you to just have you realize that, you know what, I don't really want to be a doctor anymore. It's not my thing. So shadowing is important. Other extracurriculars are research programs, like summer research programs like this. Those look great, I've been told at least. And leadership opportunities like mentoring. Something I've done is I'm a freshman mentor at my university. A lot of universities have similar programs, so you can do that as well. And I think also just anything that you you are interested in yourself. So something you'd be doing even if you weren't applying to medical school. I think that shows something there too. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Thank you, Eric. Erika. That was excellent. And for the high school level, so you may not have a lot of prior experiences, and that's fine. And so through your school, through your coursework, if there were opportunities to volunteer, you did some volunteer work, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Because this was about, oh, what extracurriculars. So, so then that's what I wanted to go back to the essay. So again, so you can then emphasize how, you haven't had that experience, but it is through your schoolwork, something maybe your teacher at school said that struck your curiosity and said, I'd like to go deeper. I'd like to have an experience to determine whether or not, medicine or basic science research is for me or both. And so for our high school programs, we definitely understand that young people may come into the program thinking, oh, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a scientist. And then after the experience, think, okay, no, that is not what I want to do. And that is okay. So just wanted you to know that.
Another thing to note is, again, up until a couple years ago, I didn't know that you could be an MD, PhD. I didn't realize you could do research while being a medical doctor. So that's something to look into as well. I'm hoping to do that myself. And now we are going to have Ms. Thomas and Dr. Brown talk about what makes an applicant stand out.
I think we did kind of touch on this, huh? Right, Heather?
I really do. I feel like everything that we talked about is really the whole picture. And my biggest thing is make sure the application is complete. You know what I mean? We're very big on making sure, nothing's missing. So that's a big one. We like to see full applications with all the letters. We understand if letters come a little bit later, that's fine. But everything else should be filled out. So that's my big one.
Yes, and if you can convey your excitement in your persistence. I mean, it's always impressive, when someone knows, they know that, okay, this area is for me. And you can see in the activities that they've been engaged in, maybe clubs that they started, or that they're very active in. There's this pattern, and you see that they're really excited about pursuing the particular pathway. So that, that kind of applicant is going to stand out, because the goal too is to get to the interview. So first, get past step one, and you want to get to step two, so then you can really get in front of someone. So definitely getting the application in on time, completed, but taking advantage of all you've learned here in this terrific workshop, to plan and to have time to go over your essay, to have others read it, and apply many places. And as Erika said, hey, you get rejected, just keep applying. Don't worry about it. Just keep applying.
That's right. And it's not always the highest grades and everything else that we rank on or anything. Is there a great need? Are we really going to be able to help this person, this applicant succeed? So, if your values are aligned with our program values, and you see us as a great resource, and we see you as a trainable scholar, there's a match there. So, we can see the need. We can see when there are applicants that have a lot of resources, that maybe wouldn't, this one here would benefit a lot more than this one because they have a little bit more support, so it is a really cohesive and just like this 360 view that we have to take. And we have excellent scholars, and it's because of, the questions that we ask and the materials that we review, and Dr. Brown and I and the other reviewers really take care of the review process.
Yes, and as you have shared, there is a rubric, and so it is very important, right? Because we all have biases, and so we do try to have an actual rubric where we can place a number on the different categories. So Erika did share with you the different categories, I believe, right? You did share that. You want to go back to that? Right, so here are the interview categories. Professionalism, coachability, Heather just mentioned that. Content of your response. So this is when you get to the interview. Your general attitude. And right, we're in the Zoom space. You can see Erika and Heather look perfectly. I'm a little under the weather today, so, but they look perfect, right? So the Zoom etiquette we've learned over these last 2 years, how to present ourselves over Zoom. Make sure you don't have any interruptions. Hopefully you have a quiet space. You see how we've blurred our background, so we don't have to worry about all the things in our background as much. Were you prepared for the interview? Certain things you're going to be expected. Whatever you've put in your application or in your essay, be prepared to discuss that because the people interviewing you can ask you about that. And so again, these things you wouldn't want to practice to a question, right? Because if you get a question that you haven't practiced for, then you may be all discombobulated, right? So it's being confident in knowing something about the program you're applying to, why you want to participate, how you think it can advance your training as you go through your career. And if you're prepared that way, the answers to that, you will do an outstanding job. Zandy has a question.
Oh, well, I just wanted to add something. I think just coming on the side from getting interviewed a lot, I think, you can say a lot of stuff, but you better have examples to back it up. I think you can say, yes, I'm hardworking. Yes, I'm good at collaborator, but also brainstorm examples, not necessarily in science, especially if you're a high schooler, where you've shown those traits. And that's so important for demonstrating that you have the capability to keep doing that in the scientific field.
Yes, like for sports, like many students are engaged in different kind of sports activity. And there are a lot of these examples that you could take from sports, right? Each one of these. Or some hobby, anything. Mm-hmm.
One thing that I forgot to mention that I've heard from several people is that you can actually ask for feedback after your application has been submitted, and say if you didn't get into the program, you can still ask them for feedback about your application. And a lot of times they'll say yes.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Okay, the last topic we have for today is organization during the application process. If you're like me, I applied to a lot of different programs, and it got a little stressful and a little disorganized eventually. So on my second attempt through all the applications, I tried to really be more organized. And I did this by first making one giant folder for all my applications. And within that folder, I had a whole bunch of tiny folders for each different application or each program I was applying to. And in each folder, I would have all the documents I needed for that particular application. And as you can see at the bottom here, I also had some Excel files, and there's a screenshot on the next slide right here. And in this Excel file, I just had the details from all of my applications in one place. So for example, I had the name of the program, when my application was due, and then I also had some information about letters of recommendation. So for example, if I asked a recommender to write me a letter, I wrote down in my notes here when I asked them, and then when they had submitted the letter, a lot of times they would confirm with me just to let me know that they had submitted the letter of recommendation. And I would put that date in there as well, so I could keep track of what had been submitted and what had not been submitted yet. I also included any general notes or any other things I needed to remember, as well as the link to the application page so I could find it easier in the future. and also a few other scholars, Elizabeth Chu and Rose Broderick and I, we combined all of the programs that we applied to into one giant Excel file that you can have. It's on our OneDrive folder in the chat, I believe. So if you open up that folder, you can find this Excel file, and there's over like 50 programs and all the information is there. Maybe the due dates are a little off, but I think it would give you a huge advantage, huge head start, because some of these programs aren't easy to find. So yeah, I hope you take advantage of that. Lastly, I just wanted to offer myself as a resource. If you need anyone to read your essays, bounce ideas off of, feel free to ask me. You can email me. There's my email right there. It's emoe@uoregon.edu. And that's all we had for today. Now I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that you all may have, or any comments.
Outstanding job. Thank you so much, Erika and Heather as well. What a terrific resource. And thank you for sharing, because as you say, it's difficult to sift through a lot of information and find these programs. So that is really going to give those who have tuned in, those who will find our website, give them most definitely a head start. Any questions then from the audience?
I just had one question. Like, what do you guys see the role of like a cover letter to be? Like, is it like a more like formal explanation of your experience, or is it like an introduction to who you are? Like, what kind of role should that play?
Yes, cover letter can be very important. You would put probably 3 points. Okay, introduce yourself, who you are, maybe what school you attend, important why you're applying to the program, and what you think this program can do for you that another program cannot. So it would be the strongest points that you want to make. So probably no more than 4 sentences. And then thank them for the opportunity, and that you hope to be able to speak to them more in depth. Make the assumption that you're going to get the interview. Good to see you, Sean. How's things going?
Doing well. How are you? And thank you, of course. All of you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anyone else wanted to add to that?
Well, I wanted to thank you all for attending, and I'm having trouble getting the link to the Excel file in the chat here, but if you check out our OneDrive file, you should be able to open that. And I just wanted to, again, thank you all for coming. Good luck with your future applications, and I hope you get into your favorite program.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, and I will post this recording to the websites in case you want to share it with your friends or go through it again. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, everyone.
Outstanding job.
Bye.
Bye.